Hey everyone, I'm Greg and I'm here today with Yash, and we're here to take a look at MarkLogic and NiFi. So Yash, tell me, I hear this word NiFi, I'm not really quite sure what that means. Sounds a lot like Wi-Fi, but what are we talking about here?
So Greg, NiFi is an Apache project which is used to create, automate, and manage data flow between different systems. So NiFi is a Java-based tool. It's cluster aware, highly secure, and it has processors which are used to manage complex and fault-tolerant data flows between systems. Now it also has an intuitive UI, which is probably its best part, where you can create processors, create templates for data flow between different systems. And one interesting thing is also that it scales out right from edge devices, plant to enterprise, on-premise data centers, or even cloud deployments. And NiFi has been proven not only in development workloads, but also in on-premise production workloads.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, so you're hitting on a lot of important things to developers. We're talking about security,
right,
scalability, a user interface that makes it easy to move data around. Right. What are some of the use cases where a developer might use NiFi?
MarkLogic has created a set of processors to orchestrate data from NiFi into MarkLogic and vice versa. So typically a developer who wants a simple and intuitive experience to ingest data from a relational database into MarkLogic, for that kind of a use case, NiFi would be the ideal choice.
Excellent. Well, that's a very common thing that we hear a developer ask. How do I get data out of a relational database and into my MarkLogic data hub? So that's exactly what we're going to show you here today. So I'd like to transition over to Jason, who's going to walk you through a demo of how to use MarkLogic and NiFi to accomplish that goal.
So to start with, when we go to use NiFi, you are obviously going to have NiFi installed. So we can get that directly from Apache. Now NiFi comes with a whole stack of processors already available. So processors are what actually do the work. For MarkLogic, that means we need to actually have MarkLogic processors available. Ultimately, we are aiming to have them released as part of NiFi to be included in that project. In the meantime, though, you can always go and get the most recent version of those right from MarkLogic's GitHub site. Now, these processors are stored into files which are called NAR Files. And once you have your NAR files in hand, we can then go and get them put in place in the right location. And for us, I'm running Mac OS. Where that is going to be here into my user local seller NiFi version, and then that's the libxc lib directory. And inside of there, you can see that I do have my two MarkLogic NiFi files available. Okay, so I've got NiFi installed. I also have MarkLogic already installed. And in MarkLogic, I happen to have an empty database here, and I can check that in my status. So nothing up the sleeves, there's nothing in this database yet. I've also got a relational database set up. Now this relational database has one table in it with 500 entries. So we went and grabbed data on the Fortune 500 companies. So obviously this means that I've got 500 entries in this relational table here. And ultimately my goal is to get the content from here in my relational table into MarkLogic. So that's all of the underpinnings that we've done so far. So let's go ahead and we're going to start actually working with NiFi. So I have it installed and running on my machine. And when you bring it up, it's going to look something like this. So we are going to go and we are going to create a flow. And again, this flow is created by linking together processor steps. So I'm going to go and grab my first processor, position it on my workspace here. And we want to start with to get data from our database. So I can start typing in here because I want to do a query, right? And I am looking to query my database table. So I've selected it. I'll hit add. And there is my first processor in my workflow. Now you can double click on this or you can right click and go configure. And this is where we can go in and start to make changes as to how this is going to behave. To start with, I am going to adjust the scheduling. Right now, it is going to run basically all the time. See, the run schedule says 0 seconds. For our purposes, I really want it to run once, and then I want to have the opportunity to stop it. So I'm going to change this to have a run schedule of 30 seconds. Right, so every 30 seconds, it's going to poll the database, and that means I can stop it. So then we can go over to our properties. Okay. For our properties, I'm going to set my database type to MySQL. My table name here is going to be companies. Right, and that is coming out of my relational. Now you see this one here, this maximum value columns. If I wanted to continuously poll a table, but make sure that I didn't double up, right, so that I only brought in each row once, I can use the maximum value columns to keep track of that, to say, okay, anytime you see an incremented value here or a bigger value here, go ahead and grab that, right, and then wait for another bigger value to show up. Now again, I'm not going to mess with that this time. I'm going to keep it simple. I'm just going to have it poll every 30 seconds, and I'm just going to manually stop it, though. For our database connection pooling service, so this is where we need to go and choose our connection, right? And I'm actually going to go and create a new one here, just so that you guys can see how this plays out. Okay, so I've done my create, and now I can go and configure it by hitting this little arrow that points off to the right. I'll go ahead and say yes to save my settings. And this is the one that I'm working on right here, this new one right here. And so let me go ahead and I'm going to hit my settings, and we can get in and see what we want to adjust for it. So in my properties here, I need to have my database connection URL, right? So I happen to have my database connection URL stashed away here. There we go. So I am doing my MySQL. I'm going to my local host, that's my port here on my IP address. I have my database name. And then we have our options here. And this is for dealing with JDBC and MySQL. So I am dealing with the time zone shift, and we're assuming the server time zone is UTC. We'll go ahead and save that. I'm going to need my driver class name. So here you can see that we have our JDBC driver listed out, and then we need to specify where is that actually found. So if you need that, right, obviously it means you would need to go and actually download it to your system and position it somewhere. Right, so in my case, I just put it into the home directory for my account. Then we also need our credentials. Now I'm just going to go in with root. Obviously, we'd want to take security considerations into mind. So I've set my credentials, including the password, and I am all set. So I can go ahead and hit apply. And then I need to go and actually enable this. Okay, and I will enable, and that will turn it on. And notice that my icons out here changed. So I had one already stashed from me messing around earlier. Notice that if I come in here and disable this, that I now have the ability to actually remove it. Right? So it doesn't let you remove stuff if you're actually using it. Okay, likewise, I can go in here and disable this MarkLogic database client, because we'll show you how to do that in a little bit. And I can delete that. But it also shows that you can reuse these things if you wanted to. I don't have to go and recreate the wheel. If I want to go and create a few different flows, I can create that connection pool and just reuse those connection settings, which is quite nice. Okay, so I can clear out of this. And we have our first processor in place. One by itself, though, isn't going to do us a lot of good. This is going in and querying that table and bringing back the table as one unit. Okay? And part of that is because of how we have it configured. Again, we could set the maximum number of rows we want to pull back and have it come back in a few different groups. We just said go ahead and do one big pull. But when I go to put this into MarkLogic, I want to have a higher resolution, right? I want to be more granular. So I need to take that one stage file, that flow file here, and I need to break it out into individual rows. And to do so, I'm going to use another processor. So we'll put this on here. And we are looking to split up our file, right? And in this case, it's an Avro file. That is the type of flow file that we are getting out of our query database table. So again, a flow file is whatever we are working on, right? It's what's being passed around between the processors. So I can go ahead and I can drag these around so it looks pretty. So things lighten up nicely. And when we go and we look at the configuration for this, okay, notice in the settings here, there's this automatically terminate relationship. So what we're going to do is we are going to specify where the flow files are going to go as each step, as each processor is completed. Now, in this case, that original Avro file that has everything, all the rows in one, I don't need it anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and terminate the original. Okay, we're going to make use of the failure and the split. Okay, but that's all I have to do here. This is automatically going to split up that Avro for me, so I'm all good. So I can go ahead and hit apply. Now I can go and drag from this processor, and notice that when I mouse over, I get that arrow. I can drag from here into split Avro. And you can see that we are going to do this for our success relationship, right? So as we have a success from our query database table, it's going to move into our split Avro processor. I'll hit add, and you can see the connection here has now been specified, right? I've got the arrow in between, a nice little box. If I wanted to rename these connections, I could. If I want to rename individual steps, I can do that as well. And I'll show you that in a couple here. So we now have our individual rows as individual Avro files. But that's not what I want in MarkLogic, right? MarkLogic, generally we're looking at XML or JSON. So let's go ahead and we're going to use another processor here. And I want to convert Avro to JSON. I'm going to go ahead and add that in and line it up. You don't have to line it up. I just like the look of it. And there's no settings here. This is automatically going to take those individual rows and turn them into individual JSONs. I'm happy. So let's go ahead and connect from split Avro to our convert. And I want to do this for my split. Okay. Now that we've got it split up and converted, now I can go and put this into MarkLogic. So we'll add our processor for that. And if I go searching for MarkLogic, you can see we've got our two potential choices. I've got a put and I've got a query, right? So query obviously means that I can go and ask questions of MarkLogic. That's cool. But for our purposes for this demo, we are going to go ahead and do a put MarkLogic, right? We're looking to export, to save to MarkLogic. So I'll add that in. And when I go to do my configuration here, we'll go to our properties. And we've got our database client service. So this is what we were looking at earlier, right? Along the lines of what happened with our MySQL. I can go and create my new service and use that little arrow to go and do my configuration and to start to make changes. So I will specify my host name. Localhost works just fine. I'll specify my port. Now the default port of 8000, as long as you have the appropriate credentials, you can reach for whatever database you want to from that port. In reality, you might be looking at going against your own app server, and that way I don't have to go through and use credentials such as admin. But for our demonstration here, that is going to work just fine. I do need to specify a database. So I know that I had called it Fortune 500. Realize that for each of these steps, each of these processors, you do generally have a comments area. So if you needed to go and add in any sort of notes of, why did you go this route or supplemental details, you could stash that in there. I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. So back in our configure processor area, we can go through and deal with some other settings now that we've got our database client service in place. So for example, I could go and specify a collection if I wanted to. I could specify a format specifically if I wanted to. But if I am going to go and mess with my URI, right? So for example, I can go and add here a prefix of company, because that's what each row represents. And I could add a suffix here of .json. And the system will figure out based upon that it is doing a JSON document. But you could specify it specifically if you really wanted to. We can also go through and specify things like permissions, right? So we're doing just the read for the REST reader and update for the REST writer. Fairly standard permission set. But you could, again, create whatever you see fit. So we'll go ahead and hit apply. And now I can go and connect my convert to my put. And I want to do that for my success. Now, as we are processing, as you are doing your work, you're going to see the flow files being queued up in the connections. And just so you guys can see that happen, I'm actually going to go ahead and add another step. Now, really, I could have just gone through and terminated right away after the put MarkLogic. And it would clean up after itself. We'd be all good. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go and add one more processor here to the bottom. And I'm just going to go and do a log message. And again, this is really just so that I can have that queue and show you that count. So I'm going to go ahead and change the name of this. You can do that from your settings here. And we can set this as all good. If you wanted to actually go and specify a specific message, we could. I'm not going to worry about it. Again, I'm just using this so that you can see the flow more than anything else. So I'm going to go and connect from my put MarkLogic to my all good. And we'll do that for success. Notice that for put MarkLogic and a lot of the other ones, you also had a failure. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add one more log message out here. And this is really just so that if theoretically there's a problem, you would see that from a queue perspective. So I can go and click and drag from my split arrow here to log message and say I want to do this for my failure. Right? Convert to arrow, failure. My put MarkLogic, failure. Okay, so you can see that for each of these now, we have gone through and linked them in. And that's perfectly legitimate. I can have multiple feeders into a single step if I wanted to. Now, look at the icons. Top left. So you can see how this has a stop. So that means this one is totally set up, but it's not doing anything yet. Okay? Some of these you can see actually have that little exclamation. Okay, so this is because we may not have everything set up yet. So for example, here, success relationship is invalid. So we don't have anything coming out of log message saying what happens if there's a success. Right? I need to go in and I need to automatically terminate. Right? We're all good there. Likewise here, I need to automatically terminate my success. Now look at the put MarkLogic. Okay, I've still got an error here, right? And notice it says because my controller service, right, is disabled. So I set up my connection pool for MarkLogic, but I hadn't turned it on. So again, the system is smart enough to do that spot check for me before I actually go and try stuff out. So let's go and fix that. I'll go into my settings here. I'll go into my properties here. Go to my database client service, and I need to actually enable. And with that, I should now see that I have my stop, which means that it is configured, it's just not running. Now, if you like seeing this all in one screen, you can zoom out. Realize that once you zoom out so far, some of the details will be hidden from you, but you'll still have your boxes. At a higher resolution, of course, you'd be able to see anything and everything. Okay, so with our flow now configured, we can go ahead and test this out. So I am going to select my query database table. I am going to hit my start button. I'm going to wait a second or two, and then I'm going to hit stop. And it still is going to finish processing all the way through. In fact, you can see that I've already got some numbers in here. I just stop it before it actually runs a second time after 30 seconds. Now remember what I said, we are going to have a single flow file coming out of our query database table. This is my entire table in one unit. So when I go and I run my next step, my split avro, instead of having one, I should see a bunch. So let's go ahead and run that. And again, I'm just going to stop it. And I can see that we had one came in, right? And 500 have gone out of our split avro, right? So we got our 500 individual rows have now left. You can see that my queued refreshed there. And so I do have 500 in between. If you wanted to, you can actually go and see what's in the queue. And you can actually even get in there and see the individual file. So this is what that avro file looks like. Okay, you can see it's got some JSON-ish tendencies to it. But let's actually turn it into a proper JSON. So I'm going to go ahead and run my convert. And then I'm going to hit stop. And again, I could just leave it running all the time, but for our purposes. So I had 500 in, 500 out. Looks pretty good. If I give it a couple moments here, I should see that my connection here has a 500 count for its queue. And I can go and look at that and actually see that. Let's see, view. There we go. Right? It does look like a very nice JSON file now. So now we can go ahead and run our put MarkLogic step. So I've got it selected. I am going to hit play, and then I'm going to hit stop. And I can see that I do have my 500 that have moved on via success and are queued up for my all good log message. And again, that was just there so you could see that it has successfully moved on. Now, since I am past my put MarkLogic step, I should be able to go and see those documents in my database. So first off, let's go and look at a database status. And after a refresh here, I can see that I do indeed have 500 documents now in my database. And if I go over to my query console, I can see that I do again have 500 documents, and I can click into these and see that it is a JSON. So we have successfully got data from a relational database and moved it into MarkLogic fairly easily through the use of NiFi and the MarkLogic processors. To get MarkLogic, download it from developer.marklogic.com. Get more training by visiting marklogic.com/training. Also, a complete selection of on-demand topics is available at mlu.marklogic.com/ondemand. Or download the MarkLogic mobile app, available on both the Apple App Store and Google Play. And don't forget to show off what you've learned. Add MarkLogic as a skill on your LinkedIn profile today. Thank you for watching this MarkLogic University on-demand tutorial.